Why have I quit my job? Why have I, bought a van? And why am I going to drive around the country? Well, I'm passionate about the idea that you need to be heard. And I want to stitch these stories together across the states. We're going to find the commonalities. And it's going to be really an amazing experience. And I look forward to you joining me on the jar. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Mental Health Today. It's your host, Ken, and another beautiful day here in Flagstaff, Arizona, where I'm on my traveling journey, as you saw from the little intro there. And as I kind of found that common thread of mental health and people's stories around the country, and surprised at the breadth and the depth of it, as well as the struggle for people to kind of find their way out, to get help, to get access, and then even, very long recovery roads. Sometimes it seems for things that maybe could have been another way. Not sure. So that that passionate kind of trying to find what's going on in the business, what's going on in the industry. I started the JAR Foundation to see what I could do in my corner as a charitable kind of way for mental health, and then also to start this show to give a platform for people that are affecting change in the industry. And the industry is overwhelmed by the size and magnitude of the problem, and caught a little off guard. And so there's a lot of people coming to the rescue. And, not all knights in shining armor look the same. Bizzie Gold, definitely. You don't look like the knight in shining armor, the classic one with your pink microphone and your, just awesome. But watching some of your stuff and your conversations and some of your reels and the events you've been at, the people you've been around, Bizzie, you have cracked open the proverbial nut here and really exposed mental health, and you've got it topical. I mean, I kind of very sheepishly said, I want to kind of affect the stigma, and that's all. And then I'm watching one of your reels, and I'm like, oh yeah, she's out there. It actually really in the mainstream having heavy conversations around it. So Bizzie,
I'm well loved and well hated simultaneously.
Yeah.
People don't typically have a vanilla response to me, and I'm okay with that.
Hey, that's good, right? And even the haters are going to love you a little bit.
The haters still watch everything I do. Surely. So that's when
the best part.
I think being an industry disruptor, you have to have a thick skin and be okay with not being well liked along the way. I don't think trendsetters are typically well liked because you're changing or exposing the cracks in the foundation of an existing system.
Yeah.
And the people that are operating within that system don't want the cracks exposed, right? They want to keep doing things the way they were taught to do them. There are many brain pattern types that are naturally resistant to change and adaptation. And often those are the very people that do tend to get stuck only thinking within the paradigm of what they've been trained to think in. And then people like me, and I would bet that you're often like me, where it's a bit easier for us to find flexibility and adaptation if we see value in it. If we can see that something's not quite as it should be, then you see the reason to be flexible. For many others that don't have that protective response to be flexible, as soon as somebody highlights the crack, they want to do anything they can to not go through cognitive dissonance. They want to actually demonize anyone who pointed out the crack, because essentially acknowledging that crack risks putting their entire academic foundation at risk. And I think ultimately they're afraid of what comes after that. So I think it's all a knee-jerk reaction to avoid having to go into and through cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it's a great, and I'd add, I think that the people that are very good at that, and we need that structured kind of mind in places, they also gravitate toward the administrative and governance functions.
Yes, they do.
And so that's a hardened, you end up in a hard person in the hardened space, and the change is so much more difficult.
It is. And when we look at, so I love that you just brought that up, because there are brain pattern types that are more administrative or authoritarian.
Yeah.
And then there are those that are much more innovative and creative and adaptable. And then there are some that are what I would call a switch position, where they can do a little bit of both. In general, many of the people that are driven into academia tend to be those who are they're just less likely to be the innovators, and they're more likely to be the administrative ones that tend to like control. They want to know what comes next. They want to understand all the edges. Whereas to juxtapose that, all these innovators are like, there's no such thing as an edge, right? So they're people that are trying to understand a problem, but fundamentally they're seeing the world in very antagonistic ways. And I do think that what the mental health sector needs right now is a blend, right? We need people to be able to collaborate in teams, because each one of us is going to see a facet of the problem and a way to solve it, but we need to be able to collaborate with the other people that are seeing the other facet that they're missing. And right now there is just this kind of hard line.
Oh, yes.
This is how you do it. If you innovate, then you're against us. And I would love to see those walls come down. And I do think that to some extent I am seeing those walls come down. There's evidence of it in my modality. But I think there's more work to be done. And I think this is kind of, to me, one of the biggest problems in mental health at large. I think many therapists need therapy. And I think, that's going to be maybe a hard, tough pill to swallow, but it just is what it is. You brought up this visual of kind of like the old white man smoking the pipe, drawing an image while the person's talking through their dreams to interpret and so on. There's this idea, and I believe break method specifically is built to oppose this, that the therapist can and should observe their client and how their client's responding to things, and through their observation kind of glean how all of these things come together to fit certain molds that they were trained to basically put people into, right? So I think there are some inherent flaws in this. So number one, I would say one of the biggest flaw in therapy as a whole, I think, is the rapport building process. So many of the therapists that I have shared clients with, or that I've eventually trained, the rapport building process can take weeks to months. And building rapport with the client is essentially getting them to trust you enough to open up. Okay. So unfortunately, the way most rapport building works in therapeutic containers is a bit more like a groomer trying to entice a child, right? So it's like you're trying to get the child to do something that the child knows is not actually, it's like out of time and it's not right. But you're like, but come on, here's some candy. So essentially you're forcing or hot wiring this connection to be made, and you put the relationship actually in a very unsteady place, because you need that person to like you to some extent, to like you enough to trust you. And as soon as they like you, they're more likely to then go into self-deception and get into their wounds and have a hard time actually doing therapy, right? Because now there's some sort of admiration or friendship, or in some cases, some therapists will just straight up try to make their client attached to them and like kind of transfer addiction onto them, like a relationship partner or a parental figure. So no matter how you do it, you're going from it as a friend, as a lover, or as a parent, right? Or some
that doesn't sound good to me.
Not ideal.
Not ideal.
So that part of it is certainly triggering, and I think it sets the relationship up in a way that is, I think, oppositional to healing. And it's also oppositional to honesty. When we are, right, when we actually put ourselves out there and we want somebody to like us in return, or we're kind of doing this two-way communication, we're more likely to lie. We're more likely to get pulled into our wound. So there's just
I'm not going to tell you everything. You're my friend now. Like, now you're my friend. I want you to like me.
Right. And then
you're my new friend.
Blurry.
You're my new friend.
You're my new friend, lines get blurry, and now we've kind of established this relationship where now you're kind of just letting them talk to you, because you're hoping that through their kind of free form flow in the beginning, when you're trying to create rapport, that you're going to be kind of catching the pieces that, again, we can kind of put into those molds that we've described. But the information that you're getting from that person is not it's not data anymore. You're getting them to tell stories, and stories are so many layers past data. And ultimately, to serve your client efficiently and effectively, and to us in Break Method, sustainability should always be the number one priority. Like, can what you do last forever and not require constant maintenance? You need to work with data rather than story, because data actually is what the brain functions on, right? Stories are how we relate to the data, but ultimately the brain is functioning off of data as a source, not story. So stories like somewhere in between the way the brain is kind of housing information and relaying it through communication. But that story is a filter that actually doesn't help us help that person, right? That they're, in terms of this kind of like old school observation, yes, you can learn that there's a certain cadence and an inherent structural flaws to a storyline that you can kind of put into these molds, but it's a really ineffective roundabout way to get that person healed, I think. So going back to this idea of kind of like broken rapport, so you've got that part of rapport, and then you've also got this part of rapport where it's like you're building it over this lengthy period of time, when quite frankly, if that person been doing Break Method, by the time that person just starts to trust you, our client would already be out and have brought us 5 more clients because they'd be done. So just in terms of like effectiveness, you could be still trying to get that person, like giving them little bits of candy, like, come on, you know, you want to trust me, or they could already be out the door being a change maker and a generational ripple in their family and giving you more clients. So this kind of, I feel like, highlights this one area of, I think part of it is systemic. And then this other part of it is in therapy, there's often no set timeline. Like, it's just kind of, well, you're done when you're done. Most people don't do well with that. Do you do well with that, Ken? Like an open-ended, like, you could be 2 years, could be 10 years, Ken. Just trust the healing process.
And what I never got, I totally agree. That's not me. And the part that that I still struggle with, and I've heard a different articulation of it. You probably, and you know the story well. I don't see how it's healing to talk about a bad traumatic event over and over and over and over again until the nerve is dead. I don't know. I never understood that. To me, that seemed like you're digging that memory deeper.
That's actually
and deeper.
Not what happens. It doesn't just eventually die. Every time you tell the story or kind of like tangentially move around the story, you're running that sequence again and again. So you're actually increasing the chemical reactivity to that memory.
Yeah, I'm getting the same,
deeper rut, like a deeper rut in the road. Every time you drive into that rut, it's getting deeper and deeper. And then eventually that rut is so deep that even if you have the tools to get out, you're like, oh my, I'm so deep. How do I get out? I've told
the Grand Canyon.
And then the worst part is that then, especially when I have a lot of, I would say the majority of my practice these days, me personally, are clients that have literally tried everything and they're like, I'm hopeless. I guess, you know, this is it for me. I'm going to be broken forever. And our success rate is incredibly high. And I'm not afraid of those clients that have, you know, been fired by all of their therapists, or all the different modalities haven't
fired by all their therapists.
I don't mind that. But what happens is often people are in therapy for so long that this kind of storytelling mechanism and reliving their trauma, it actually becomes a part of their identity. And then they can no longer separate that which happened to them from who they are. And then you just have this kind of like entanglement where the person no longer remembers what it was like to be free of it, which I think it's becoming more and more prominent in the space, because a lot of modalities are, I'll give one specific example. So I work with a lot of clients actually that had either undergone gender transition at some point, or at least partially gender transition, and then started to go back and realize, wait, I wasn't treated correctly here. Something's off. I don't, you know, I think, without stepping on too many landmines here in this show, I think there's definitely a push in the industry to just blanket affirm. So you end up getting people who are put on treatments that really, if we're being honest with ourselves, they shouldn't have been a candidate for such things. So it's not surprising that they got partway into the transition and then realized, no, this is not for me. So I do work with many of those clients. And one of the things that I have bumped into quite a bit is this prevalence of something called ERP, which I'll tell it through I'll kind of like brush together broad strokes of a few different clients that I'm not talking about specific clients. But
good.
So I'll use one example of somebody who, because this is pretty prominent, as soon as you start to introduce psychedelics or medicine ceremony and things like that, if somebody has a very specific underlying brain pattern, once you introduce something like that, if there was already a tendency toward compulsion or intrusive thoughts, doing that medicine, in air quotes, ceremony can actually do quite a bit of harm for that person, because then any little thing that is introduced during that time, it's like the architecture is there for it to really root in, and it just, that person is already lacking some level of self-trust, and they're highly suggestible as a person. So as soon as that little thing gets in there, all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, maybe I am. And I have had quite a few clients who in medicine ceremony have come out and then all of a sudden being like, well, maybe I am gay, but they're married with kids and they're like, but I've literally never had a gay thought in my whole life. And then it kind of unfolds this whole thing where I've had quite a few clients who kind of fit that mold. And then I have quite a few clients who have had OCD and other intrusive thought forms start to kind of get pulled into this, like, well, what if I am trans? Even though that's their, 20s, 30s, that thought never occurred to them until now. It's literally plastered everywhere, but they have the same thing, low self-trust and that high suggestibility,
just
right? So it's like as soon as it implants, it just roots in, and then they're like, oh, well, maybe. And then they just fixate and ruminate and fixate and ruminate. So both of these kind of subsets of clients I've seen get so much worse through doing things like ERP, where the therapist actually makes them expose themselves. I can't even say it without getting so upset. They decided it was a good idea for all these clients, and I'm probably talking like an amalgamation of like 12 different clients that I've had over the last year and a half.
Just that you know.
Just
yeah,
that I've
only
had,
the ones that you know.
Just that I've had personally. Yeah.
Yeah. So this
where
is
the therapist actually forces them to expose themselves to graphic information. So in some of these cases, oh, well, go watch gay porn. You've got to watch X amount of hours of gay porn. Well, here's the problem. This person's already highly suggestible. They're getting attacked by their own, I would say, out of control visualization mechanism. And then you're literally just mainlining them exactly what's going to make it worse. So I end up getting the people where it's like, they're so much worse because their therapist forced them to expose themselves to this content when that never should have been recommended to them ever, because then I have to spend months undoing the damage from therapy to then get them back to baseline and then help them from there.
And then
so it takes twice as long. We're still successful with it, but I've had more cases in the last year.
This is called ERP?
This one person called it ERP. I think it's like exposure something. I don't know what ERP is, but apparently it's very prevalent in those spaces. And to be honest, I think if we look at how they function for certain types, sure, like exposure to a stimulus, like if somebody has a phobia of like going on an elevator, okay, if you ride on an elevator 100 times, maybe by time 80, you'll be less emotionally rattled by going on an elevator. Okay, sure, fine. I'm willing to concede that.
Maybe.
I don't
frankly,
know. I don't like elevators. There's something you could do to make me like elevators.
Yeah, like for some people, just like I get in and I get out, and that's all I need. I don't need to be in one 100 times to. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Keep going.
So I'm just giving that example that like I'm willing to concede that in certain circumstances, exposure to a stimulus that's causing that triggering event can be useful. But in this particular case where these people are already overwhelmed with visual stimulus, and that is part of what is kind of puppet mastering this mechanism to literally destroy their lives, why you would ratchet up that visual stimulus, it just doesn't feel like it is in the best interest of the client. I've just seen it do so much damage. So, and I do think that there's more of that prevalent in today's society. And I think people need to be mindful about the retelling, constantly exposing. There's a very specific sequence that we need to go through to rewire. And I do agree that, the way we do it in break method, there's a very specific sequence and a structure, and you don't deviate from the structure, because ultimately the way your brain pattern currently functions is like a default setting. If you think about your phone, if you've ever like gotten things out of control and you're like, oh, I need to go back to the beginning, there's like 3 buttons that you hold in a certain sequence. It's like we can return it back to its default settings.
Yeah.
The brain develops a default setting, which is your brain pattern between the ages of 2 and 5. So this is a survival-based pattern. So it usually starts with either fear or fear of shame. So this pattern is going to exist. We map an 8-part system in this brain pattern. But essentially, this brain pattern is hardwired in by ages 2 to 5. And the way that it functions, it tricks you into believing that you and it are one and the same.
Okay.
But what actually can happen if the structure is correct is you can actually help the client see that which they are and were always destined to be as a God-created being or whatever you want to call it, versus that which their brain has adapted to survive. Because they are soul and separate, and so many of us have spent many years of our lives never acknowledging the separation, never trying to really uncover where that line is, that we just operate as self, when really that's not accurate. So when we're looking at how this set structure works, the reason we can't ever deviate or adapt is because the brain pattern will function like a virus on a mainframe of a computer. It wants to survive. It's very intelligent because it knows you, because it's masqueraded as you this whole time. So it kind of knows how to bob and weave to stay hidden. But it also rapidly replicates. So if there's a certain area of your life where it's like, okay, I really know that I have to work on this area of my life, and you start to experience healing in that area, this is when that brain pattern will kind of pivot and it'll switch into a different facet of your life where all of a sudden you're like, why is this area of my life a dumpster fire now? I just worked on that one.
The brain, and man, that's so good.
So then it literally will then kind of, again, shift. Okay, well, this area of your life, you're now focused on healing. So I'm going to have to go attack a different area of your life, because ultimately it still wants to get its fix, because there's a chemical component to running this brain pattern. Because we know the body, whatever we experience with high repetition between 2 and 5, the body will become chemically addicted to it. So it'll seek out opportunities to label things in a certain way to run this chemical loop. So when the client is able to say, no, I don't want to do that, or yeah, let's move on to something else, the brain will actually delay its own healing if you allow the brain pattern to make decisions about what you do and what you don't do, which is why in our set structure, we tell clients right off the bat, by doing this, you are agreeing to being a rat put in a maze, and like you're getting out when you get out, but you're not going to like a lot of the process. Some of the process, you might want to throw your paper at me. You might want to tell me to go F myself. But nonetheless, you're choosing to be here, and we're going to get you out the other side. And we're going to get you out the other side in 4 months. How does that sound? They're like, sounds great. What I found is that
that's so funny.
People end up loving the experience. Like today I literally had back-to-back clients from 8:15 in the morning to present, and the type of client we have, because people are like, oh, well, there must be like a certain type of client that you work with, and today I had virtually every range you could imagine, from a 7-year-old client to a 63-year-old client to people that are completely impoverished, living gang life, who just got out of prison, to high-level CEOs. This work is for everyone, and part of the reason that Break Method is so effective is that ultimately, I believe, and again, this is not the opinion that most people in the mental health space want to lean into, but I think how we change our approach for perceived diagnoses actually keeps people stuck in said diagnoses. The same way that the brain pattern will kind of bob and weave and avoid the things that actually it needs to do to break out of it. The same is true for diagnoses, which is why people are like, oh, well, I have trauma, therefore I have to do it this way. Or I have bipolar, therefore I have to do it this way. My belief, which I feel like we have proven extensively through data analytics, is there are only so many subsets of brain patterns. There are 5 primary brain pattern types that you can have. Every diagnosis can then correlate with these different buckets of brain pattern types. And once we can see the clusters, we can say, okay, in general, people with, type 2 bipolar tend to be clustered right here. But let's put that aside. Let's do your brain pattern assessment and let's see where it puts you. boom, the brain pattern assessment puts you right in this cluster where, okay, this is why you're getting diagnosed this way. But here's the truth. I could have a group of 10 people that are all plotted right on this place at the same spot in your brain pattern assessment. 8 of them could lead completely normal lives, have no issues, no diagnosis. How come these 2 are the ones getting the diagnosis? In many cases, it comes down to a communication filter. So how we express and how we process and what we're sharing versus not sharing is often what is separating somebody with a diagnosis from somebody who's just quietly leading their lives, right? So really, I mean, to some extent, I kind of joke with people that really, like, everyone's crazy. Some people are just quiet crazy and some people are loud crazy.
Yeah, it's like extrovert crazy and introvert crazy.
Yeah, like, do you know where the line is between what to say and not to say? And can you see the value in yielding or holding back? Many people's brain pattern types, which I'll show you this in a video, I'll send it to you, and I'm actually happy to I'll do a brain pattern assessment for you because I think you would geek out on it. So the spectrum, obviously there's a midpoint and then it kind of fans out to the sides. The further you go out to the sides, the harder it is for you to find it within you to yield and not address something immediately. So there's this like perceived urgency the further out you go out to the side. So the people toward the midline of the spectrum, they lead in general pretty complacent, like meh lives. Like not a lot happens, not a lot good, not a lot bad. They don't take a lot of risks. They're just kind of like, you know? So I always tell people, especially when I'm training therapists, like this cluster, and I have it circled in the middle, it's very rare that we see clients that are in this part of the spectrum, unless they're like 50s, 60s, and they've got empty nester syndrome. And they're like, what do I do with my life now? My kids are gone. Like, I'm not fighting with my partner. Like, who am I? What am I here for? Then you might get people on that center. But in general, that subset of people, they're not going to have dumpster fire lives. They're not going to be, you know, walking around with diagnoses on a bunch of pills because they're just kind of, not that much is going on. But as you move out toward the sides, diagnoses will tend to uptick on both sides. So what we do in Break Method is really focus in first, but I'll start this way. So we talked a bit about the rapport problem in the traditional therapy container. With Break Method, our belief is that the only rapport that needs to be established needs to happen in session 1, and it's built on authority and accuracy. If doing our diagnostic, which takes 30 minutes, I can actually tell you every single thing about your life to such a high level that you're like, what is it? Like, how did you do this? Then it doesn't matter if you like me or not.
You don't have to like me actually.
You don't have to like me. You just know deep down in your core that I'm more right than anyone's ever been about your life. And then we're good. It's like, cool.
And I might hate you. No. I might hate you just for that.
And some people do.
Or love you.
But at the same time, I think the curiosity, even if they hate, and I'll tell a quick little tidbit about this after I'm done with this, but sometimes they are triggered by it, but it's done in such a way where their curiosity is so piqued that somebody could possibly in 30 minutes like get that much out of it that they're just I'm so excited, let's go. Like I hate you, I don't want to do this, but I have to know.
Absolutely. You surrender.
I had a client who I'm now quasi in business with. So obviously this turned out well.
It went well. Okay.
It went well. It turned out all good. When I first did his brain pattern assessment, very authoritative, very confident.
Yes.
You could tell was used to being able to lead the conversation and not be the one kind of like answering questions. Naturally, I think questions authority and so on. You can picture this guy. Very, very successful gentleman.
Yes.
And we got to the end, did his whole thing, and then I sent him his brain pattern assessment, and things ended great. It turned out I had previously helped his wife years prior, so he was already like very much on board. He was like, "You changed my life."
Cool.
So I left it at that, thought we were good, sent him his brain pattern diagnostic, and went on with my life. Then one day later, I was on the ski lift with my kids, and all of a sudden my phone is like ringing, and I finally answer it, and it's one of our client support team, because we have people who work with the clients in the in-between sessions, which is a whole other thing that's very different
Okay.
about breaks. So we've kind of have two different roles. So we've got kind
That's
of
great.
the
Great idea.
stand-in for therapy, which for us, we call it behavior strategy. So this is like the hardline diagnostic work, rolling up the sleeves, getting to work, no chit chat. I don't want to know what's happening in your week. Like, that's not my job.
Yeah, I
That's
don't
their
care.
job.
Yeah.
Right. So the client support job is the how are things going? What's happening this week? And then I just get to start my sessions already with an overview so that we don't have to chit chat. I already know what happened and I know how to keep us moving forward. Because I do think that that role differentiation in therapy container is part of the problem. How long do you let somebody tell you about their week before really they're paying you to just talk about their week? That doesn't feel very effective to me.
No.
No.
I would imagine there's a lot of that goes on.
I mean, as a child, I'm pretty sure my parents, and I'm sorry to be cracking my back, I've just been sitting in the chair for so long. I'm pretty sure my parents paid a lot of money for me to play Battleship for like a year and a half straight with my therapist and say nothing other than I sunk your Battleship.
It's like babysitting.
Totally. Like the most expensive, weird babysitter ever.
And on top of it, yeah, also a bit weird.
So weird. So my phone's blowing up and I finally answer it and it's our sweet client support team. And she's like, oh my God, have you talked to so-and-so? Like they're so mad. They want a refund. And I was like, huh? So then I'm starting to read through her text messages and basically he's like, F this, nobody can put me in a box. There's nobody that anyone could possibly know this much about me in 30 minutes. I call bullshit and is like freaking out. And I looked at Josie on the phone. I'm just like, Josie, here's the deal. Pull up his pattern diagnostic right now. So she did. And I was like, you're trained to see this. What am I about to tell you? And she was like, he's in his protective emotion. I'm like, okay. And what does it say about all the things he does during his protective emotion? She reads it all. I'm like, okay, so what do you have to do? And she's like, I have to go to him and I've got to tell him, sir, you are in your cycle right now. This is what you're here to heal from. And we're not going to let you do this to yourself because this is the self that this is why you haven't healed yet. Because people just concede and they want to placate you. And I'm very sorry, sir, but I'm not going to placate you right now. Pull open your packet and let's talk through this. So she was like, I'm scared. And I was like, you can do this.
You can do it. Oh God, that's so classic.
It, and eventually eventually, like it was a couple of days. It wasn't like, weeks later. A couple of days later, I get an email from him that's like, I'm so sorry about that. It was a humbling experience. I realized like I'm such an authority figure in my life that nobody really checks me like that. And I really sat with it and I saw it. And I'm just, if you want to pass me off to somebody else on the team after this, I totally understand. And I've basically responded like, dude, we're all adults here. Let's just keep it going. I'm not personally offended.
Yeah,
I'm not surprised, frankly, at all. So let's just go. Let's get you what you came for. So eventually it turned into a relationship where it turns out he actually, like mathematics and tech background, runs one of the larger tech consulting companies in the US. And we've been on this endeavor for the last 6 months to essentially do all of the data mapping of all of our client records to establish nodal maps of essentially a data analytics approach to solving the mental health crisis. And we've actually done it. So our alpha launched last week. So this really is a completely opposite approach to healing the collective than the traditional mental health container, because as you mentioned at the beginning, it's like observe, take notes, try to fit them into a mold, but you're battling against the therapist's own subjective observation, right? With that, like that's a huge problem.
I'm a data guy. I my whole career, I made a fat living off of being able to understand data and then take the appropriate actions to affect change in the data at a root cause level.
Yeah.
I'm a root cause guy, really, but I'm a root cause person. I use data to do it. So I'm maybe not a data driven. I'm more of if I'd flip it on its head and say the data for me is a tool to get to the fix.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that is, so some people use it the other way, right? Where they use data to predict the output, but you can also reverse engineer the data to predict the input, which is what we've done in Break.
You're just flipping the equation. You're doing some algebra with the equation.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Genius. This is so cool because I say you've hit everything that I have that has given me a little bit of that angst when I'm in this business, for
Yeah.
90 days now. I'm in here 90 days and and you just that last kind of close that you just gave is amazing.
And it is absolutely the mental health system of the future. I believe
Mm-hmm.
it with every cell of my being. Whenever therapists see it and have that resistance, if they even just take one little tiptoe over the edge,
Mm-hmm.
eventually, even the person that hates
Yeah,
me,
I know.
they can't deny what they're seeing. I had a recent therapist describe it as an algorithm that aggregates all of the therapy jargon that they've ever learned in their lifetime and puts it into a synthesized system that helps them treat people more effectively without any wasted time and without their own personal issues getting in the way, which is exactly what it's created for. It's to help
Yeah.
clients heal without any of the inherent blockages in the old therapeutic container. Because I personally my opinion can't actually negatively impact the healing of my clients because it's not based on my opinion. It's all based on data.
I
So, and I'll even say, I really would have thought that you were this, but the data says this. So we're going to go with the data. And we test it extensively over every area of your life to see if we can get it to break. Because ultimately, I don't want to tell you to rewire a pattern that you don't have because then it won't
Yes.
work. And I don't like to be bad at my job.
Yeah, and being good at your I mean, some people being good at the job means like straight lines or white lines or a smooth asphalt, but I mean, being good at your job is really, really
It's
important.
very important.
Or
And
I should say
and
being bad at your job is a really bad thing.
yeah, I had one of my staff members say, every time it's like taking off on a plane and just being like, "Don't crash, don't crash, don't crash, don't crash, don't crash." That doesn't happen to me because I don't have that brain pattern. I have the like, I'll figure it out no matter what as we go along. But
Oh yeah, I'm not
um,
yeah.
but
There's no such thing
the
as a
reality is,
crash.
I think part of the reason that break method at this phase is where it is that every single time I run it, I'm taking what we've learned in that client container, and we're looking for ways that we could have made it better and more
Mm,
effective. So every single time it's being refined. So what is being run now is a refined system that started in 2014. So if you think about having run that system 15,000 plus times, if you're paying attention and you're not just saying to yourself, this system works because somebody told me that it works to get my degree, and instead you're saying there's always a way to make this better and I'm going to
yeah.
learn every single time, then you evolve the system to a place where it really can meet the needs of every type of person in the world, which is ultimately what I'm trying to do. Is I'm trying to bring a system into the world that allows every single person to be restored back to their original
I love
template, because really
back
we
to the
all,
reset.
yeah, back to that reset. Because I most people, and this is again, it's kind of it's a gray area in today's world, because I feel like people are either in the like, oh, everyone has trauma, or people are in the like, there's no such thing as trauma. Like, it just, people weaponize it on either side. And I think the reality is that, yes, we definitely are living in a time and space where victim culture is on the rise. And it's kind of like
Yeah.
a cool thing to have some sort of trauma-based victim story. But from a very foundational perspective, from working with thousands of clients, people do all have some trauma wounds, period, full stop. And I always tell people, whether it's clients that we're working with or therapists, it doesn't take much for a child to be imprinted with trauma, because a child is born into this frail, tiny little body that can't
Mhm.
sustain itself. And anything that is not supportive of love, innocence, or curiosity immediately goes to the brain as trauma. So
Yeah.
you could have a white picket fence, both parents home, 1.5 kids with a dog, and you could still have significant trauma inputs from things that, if we're just sitting here and be like, that wasn't that traumatizing, that's not how the brain perceives it, because it doesn't have anything to compare and contrast against. So
Oh, yeah.
whatever happens with
Mm.
the early repetitions is going to create the brain pattern. And I think that's where a lot of therapeutic
Ah.
containers miss it, is they're I believe they're not looking for the right inputs, because ultimately your brain pattern is a map of your input-output relationships, because
Yeah.
inputs
Yes.
repetitively will create an output in a behavior, personality
Yeah.
expression,
Yes.
communication style, the way we perceive reality. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're not mapping the right inputs, you're gonna miss the whole damn thing. So part of what we do is we extensively map the correct system of input-output relationships, so much so that now you can go through the system, you fill out the things, and it knows exactly what inputs generate what type of outputs, and then we can predict everything about you to a point that you're like, wait, what?
I
How? And it's because we're just not all that unique. There's basically 5 versions of us.
this is the one. That's the one thing I do love about this. The way you've on one side of this solving the problem is we've created 7 billion unique brains that all have unique experiences, and
Mhm.
how, and then you've got, 100,000 people trying to solve these problems, right? To kind of get them back to reset. How is
Yep.
that ever? That is never going to work, because they all have different. No one's sharing data. Somebody 80 years old, they die, you lose all their knowledge. Uh, at least what you've got, I like it. You get it down to 5 people. There's only 5 people in the world,
Yeah,
and
I
you're
mean,
one of the
from
5. And
from
here's the
there, there
process.
there's there are different subsets past the 5,
Sure,
but in terms of,
sure,
like, just broad strokes,
yeah,
umbrella level
yep,
brain patterns, there's only 5
yeah.
variations.
To
So,
me, that makes way more sense.
there's a lot of nuance after that, and there's certain environmental conditions that generate certain brain pattern types.
Hmm.
So an example of this would be, we've found that when this could be for a whole other podcast episode, so I'll just give it a little bit. So essentially, what ends up happening is that when the more stable the home is, so the more
Hmm.
parents are married, the more, you would expect things to be that, like, white picket fence. We actually see that those are some of the worst outcomes in terms of mental health. Because often with that, there's not a lot of emotional resilience built up. There's
Oh,
often a
huh.
very selfish perspective or self-centered perspective of the world around them, because they weren't fighting for their lives to some extent, so they
Yeah, yeah,
often don't
yeah.
develop situational awareness, and everything is about what people are thinking about them, which is a really challenging perspective to collaborate with other people, because unless you do work like this, you just think that everybody operates that way, but the reality is you're actually the minority, and most people are highly situationally aware and kind of relationally dumb.
Whoa,
And then
that's weird.
meanwhile, you're obsessive about relational interactions and what people are thinking about you. Meanwhile, nobody's thinking about you because they're thinking
Yeah,
about
yeah. Actually, nobody thinks about. Actually, that's one of my most favorite discoveries in life. Actually, nobody's really thinking
no one
about
cares
you.
about you. That's the heart
And
pull their
worse
back,
is
no
no
one
one
cares.
cares about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we see is that when we're looking at the brain pattern spectrum, a lot of the inputs that we think we are doing to kind of like
Yeah.
reparent and heal and all these things, what we've found is that those are ultimately often responsible for attachment disorders and different types of obsessive behavior, different levels of suicidal ideation, addiction, all the rest of it. So
Wow.
what I'll show you, and maybe I'll totally give you this video so that if you want to share it with your audience, you can.
Hmm.
I have like a little breakdown of what the source belief spectrum is, and so how
Okay.
people can kind of understand where they exist on it, even without doing the brain pattern
Yeah, I'll put
assessment.
that on the page later. I'll throw
Okay.
that on the page tomorrow.
So yeah, essentially, as you move to the far sides of the spectrum,
Yeah.
kind of away from that midline, we start to hit people that would present as having more like paranoia or psychosis, right? Because eventually, if you think about it this way, if you move from the midpoint out to one of the sides, situational awareness is increasing. If you get all the way out to the far side, you're so situationally aware that you don't know what to take action on and not take action on, because everything seems urgent. Okay. So if you look at the reflection of that on the rejection side, as you move all the way out to the side, the same thing is true. You're so obsessive about what other people are thinking about you that at a certain point you lose track of reality, because you're so fixated on what other people are thinking that you're not even really living your life anymore. You're just thinking about what other people are observing in you. So both of those I've found in the kind of traditional therapy world, those two types of people actually often get diagnosed the same way and they're treated in therapy the same way. Whereas in break method, we see the stark contrast. And when you treat those two people very differently, they thrive very quickly. Because they're like, oh my God, I saw it. Where you have to get them to separate from it enough to see the flaw or the error in the system, and then give them obviously the right tools to support the rewiring. But they're very different, and they would always look the same. If you were just observing, you would think they were the same person.
So you show that to a therapist, and that breaks their code.
Yeah, and then they're like, "Oh my God, you're right."
Oh,
right, because they can think of how many times they're like, "Yes, I would do that person the same way." And then when I show them, okay, but if you do this for that person versus this for that person, they're like, "Oh my God, I just saw it," and their whole world like melts. So I think really the source belief spectrum, I think, holds the keys to our collective healing to some degree. And, for what it's worth, I am a big believer in God, and I'm certainly not sitting here being like, I designed the whole thing and I'm awesome, everybody praise me. I just really think that I have really leaned into my relationship with God, and this was a gift that was entrusted to me, because I don't believe for a second that I created this. I think this is sometimes things just are the truth, and I was entrusted to caretake this information, and I'm very passionate about getting it into the hands of the people that can actually move the needle forward. So whether that's a therapist or a social worker or somebody that works at the VA or the DOD or whoever's listening to this is the mental health modality that holds the keys to our collective outcome, because it can be applied to anybody. I've taught this in the prison system, limited to 2 days, and we've had complete change, where I went in there with the goal of decreasing recidivism by 46%. We decreased it by 68%. People that were constant repeat offenders after they did break never came back. So I know it works. And it works.
I'm curious to see what is the incidence of violence? Like if you did the whole prison, like if you're able to get like some kind of class teaching people, teaching others, and you did the whole prison population of 800, like what would the interviolence be?
And it would change so much. So in this particular prison, I can share because a lot of it's public record now. When I was in the prison, it became very clear to me that a few of the women were experiencing sexual violence at the hands of some of the guards in the prison. And knowing what their brain patterns were, I kind of just went right into it. And I was like, hey, your brain pattern's going to tell you can't speak up about this, or you got to keep holding it together for all these other women. And I was like, so here's what we're going to do. And I brought in the other people that were from within the prison that were considered safe spaces.
Wow.
And we actually helped them with break method pattern opposition, organize in the right way, not organize in like a trauma bonding, F the man, like that kind of thing. Because usually a lot of the people there, it's like your brain pattern tends to make you pendulum swing. It's like, I'm either not talking or I'm in your face cussing you out, when the reality is none of them knew how to kind of recalibrate at midpoint and communicate, but communicate effectively. Okay. So we actually worked with them to address the issue with the higher ups. And within a week and a half, it went from just all these women it turned out it ended up being most of the women in the prison. Within a few weeks' time, the main guard was fired and charges were filed against him, and the whole hierarchy of the whole prison after we left, that all fell apart, and a bunch of these exposés came out. So we literally flipped the whole prison system in a 2-day workshop of helping these women learn how to properly advocate for themselves.
Wow.
And actually follow the sequence that will actually yield results, rather than what they had been doing before, which was either not talking or cussing out, right? Either getting in trouble or allowing the trouble to follow them.
Yes, right. So being quiet.
We completely flipped the whole thing, and so many of the women never ended up going back to prison again. I had many of those women immediately, as soon as they got out, enrolled in break. I want to do the whole thing now. So you would think that, when somebody gets out of prison, they're like, freedom. They're not going to be like, I want to go do that mental health thing. But that's
I just don't see many people saying I want to do the unless it's so powerful.
When we gave surveys on the last day, and there were a bunch of questions where people could rate it. Most of the women wrote at the bottom, will you please go to the men's prison? My husband needs this, right? Because so many of them both were in prison because they committed their crimes either together or were somehow both involved.
Or against each other, or
Yeah. So almost every single person there, the bottom thing was, can you please go to the men's prison? My husband needs break.
Man.
So I've seen that it can be applied to a child. It can be applied to a person that believes they're too old to learn new things.
Hmm.
I've seen it applied to people that have virtually no education, that can barely spell 4-letter words correctly. And I've seen it work in 2 days. I've seen it work in 4 months, but I would say the average time to
Yeah.
complete break is 12 to 16 weeks. And after 16 weeks, our whole thing is, I would love to see you again for a high five and an update. But if we did
Yeah,
our
but
jobs effectively, then you should never need us again, other than like a check-in if life throws you a curveball and so on.
right.
But we empower our clients to understand what we do rather than us do it for you. So we're always doing the diagnostic work and educating you alongside that so that you can take this with you for the rest of your
Hmm.
life. And for
Bizzie
that
Gold,
reason,
man.
we
Wow.
have a 93% organic referral rate. So 93% of our clients bring us other clients. So I feel like that kind of hits that wound where a lot of therapists aren't sure, well, if my clients graduate or leave so quickly, then how do I keep them as clients? When the reality is,
Oh
if you're
my God.
doing your job well, they should be leaving quickly, but bringing all of their friends and family. Like I've had periods of time where I have literally like 10 people connected to the same family line in the same town. That's how it happens if you actually do your job effectively. More people
Yeah,
come.
and this is the funniest part, right? I could totally see that being a thing. Like, well, but what if I fix everybody and then I'm out of
Then
business?
what? How do I market to them? Yeah. So
Yeah, how do
you
I find
you
more
you
sick people?
solve the marketing problem by solving the efficacy and
I
efficiency problem.
Yeah, and if you're having trouble finding, if you're worried about losing a client because they get well and not getting one, that probably means your referral rate is pretty low, which might
Yeah.
tell you something.
Well, and I think that goes back to a lot of therapists, they don't really understand marketing, right? They didn't join that
Yeah, yeah,
profession
yeah.
because they wanted
They're
to
not.
understand that piece of it. So that is something when in our certification for therapists, we do also train people in how to properly build those systems
How to
around
Okay.
your practice. Because it is a different approach, right? It's opposite of the way
Yeah,
you have been doing it, but
yeah.
can tell you with certainty the payoff emotionally for you and energy-wise
Wow.
for you
Yeah.
is massive.
I would imagine that's powerful to see that kind of change in your clients across just and many clients, right? Now you're not just holding on to 20 or 30 or 100.
Mhm.
You're cycling through.
Yeah, we see hundreds of people a week, and one of my favorite things, and this is something I prayed for a few years ago, was that I really wanted to be able to help more men who would otherwise be
Mm,
resistant to therapy because they're like, I
right.
don't want to talk about my feelings. I don't want to kick around a tissue box. Like, I'm good. Those people still need this work, right?
Yeah.
So I really was just so prayerful about how do I get these people to see break and say yes. And over the last year, we've really tipped the scales. Like in this month, almost every single one of our new clients is male. So we've done it, and they're guys that I'm really excited because even just a lot of the male clients that I had today, they are like the guys. We're out there like getting girls, making money, like just all the things that are able to sit across the camera from me and be like, busy on the outside. It looks like I have my life together. Like I go to the gym, I work out, but like I'm a broken man. I want to be able to, I like deep down, I want to have a marriage. I want to have kids. What is
Right.
wrong with me? So
Yes.
that is kind of our new core client, which I'm here for that because I think
I'm
more men need to be able to step forward and say, okay, I don't want to sit around and talk about my feelings, but I do want to do that. That looks like an engineering approach to my problem. Show me how to fix
I
this like a mechanic, and I'm in.
I love that. That's so dude. If you give them a manual,
Yeah.
how to
And
pull your
and
brain.
that is ultimately what you get out of break is when you're ready to graduate, you get what we call a break blueprint, which is the operating manual to who you are and all the ways
Okay.
that you try to destroy your own life and exactly what to do if, when, etc.
Busy Gold, man. Thank you so much. You are passionate and like you said, I love how you described it being you're a caretaker for the idea. It's been given to you to go out and to spread the word.
That's what I'm here to do.
Muse is a real thing, right? You know, sometimes things come to us and it's not yours, and you look at it later on paper and you kind of just do one of those cockeyed looks like, not really sure. I guess it came from me, right? And
Break is so profound and has so many levels of data mapping to it that even when I've worked through this now with literally a whole team for 6 months that are like, Bizzie, what the, like, how did you do this? What? Because I was able to just innately know things that it's taken months for the computer to be able to kind of map and be like, oh, that's where it is, and that's where that goes.
Wow.
So it can't possibly be me is kind of where I'm going with this, is like, there's too many levels of input output relationships and depth. It was gifted to me, and it's my honor to be able to pass this on to other therapists. And I think that's really the big takeaway is, for Break, we work with individuals, we work with couples, we work with families and kids, but where I've really tried to shift my focus over this next year is to train as many therapists as possible. So if you're a therapist watching this, if you're somebody who wishes your therapist was watching this, please share it with them. I want to train them. We have an upcoming training. So let's make sure we get those people in and start spreading it.
Bizzie Gold, thanks so much for being a guest on the show. This is fantastic for me. I learned a lot. I found somebody who's in my, I've got that, I had all these weird thoughts, and now to know that actually I'm not too crazy, that my observations are kind of reasonably accurate, and so it's great to know, and it gives me good hope that if I saw it and you saw it 10 years ago and you've got a fix for it, we're close to solve, we're close to turning the corner on this.
I think
even though it looks like we're still got the tsunami kind of on top of us. Thanks so much. Hang around for 30 seconds and just chat on the other side. I got one more commercial.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, thanks. And Bizzie, how do so breakthrough? Maybe one last. We've got some people on the audio.
People can go to breakmethod.com, BREAK method.com. You can take a look through the website. We obviously work with individuals, couples, families, kids, and then we also train therapists. I would say for most people, the best way to dip the toe in the water is to book a brain pattern assessment. The brain pattern assessments are $129, and you get a full multi-page PDF report on exactly who you are and what made you that way. And then we go from there.
If you can handle the creepiness of that.
people can always handle. They're usually excited. They're scared excited, but usually they're excited.
Yeah, kind of just joking about, like they said, people like, how do you know that about me? And then immediately reject it because that, that just doesn't work like that. I just love it. That's how you're really onto something magical.
Yes.
So thanks again, everybody. And Bizzie Gold, man, thanks so much. Bottom of my heart.
Thanks. You're a great interviewer.
See you in 30 seconds.
Yeah, loose, baby.
But we're about to go and make this vessel with these great professionals in public glass. We're not part of the community, but we're from the outer family of glass blowing. Yeah, we're gonna go make a magical giant jar with optic lenses so that if you turn it, it changes all the time. So if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.